Hi, Jérôme.
Hello, Yael.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm excellent. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. Highly appreciate that you're here with us. I'm super excited about the conversation. Sorry. Please tell us a bit more about yourself.
About myself, well, that's how much time do we have? Look, the short version is that I've spent most of my career asking questions about the intersection of business and society. I run a think tank called Preventable Surprises, which is focused on systemic sustainability risk in financial markets. It's really about pushing the boundaries of what's now called ESG or responsible investment. I also co-host a podcast called Breaking the Fever, which is now launching its second season. It's a focus on power shift. So I've been in your shoes.
We're gonna add it in the bio, of course.
Thank you, and it's, I always think it's a really interesting conversational exercise, and fundamentally, I mean, my work and what I'm interested in doing my work is, as I said, pushing boundaries, asking questions, talking to people, engaging with actors, whatever their persuasion, whatever their position and their thinking about environmental, social governance, sustainability, politics, and everything, and saying, how do we find common ground? How do we build a way together? How do we find a way between, a world of idealists and pragmatists, between the NGO, civil society, and the investors, and so on and so forth. I think it's clear to me and to many people who work in the sustainability space that we live in a very dynamic moment in terms of environmental challenges, in terms of societal challenges, and maybe also we live in a time where we are increasingly aware of them, but also increasingly feel like we have some level of agency because we're able to forecast things in the way that we weren't before. We can talk about environmental evolution in 10, 20, 30 years, within a spectrum of possibles, of course, not with any sort of deterministic value or sense, but we're in a different scientific and intellectual position, and so, but we also live and work in very complex systems.
Right.
And so one question we have is, what's our agency? How do we bring about change? How we drive change? What change? With whom? And to what good, right? And so I think in many ways it's even though it's a set of practical questions, they become ethical questions, they become political questions, they become questions about what it means to live together, and that to me is the fundamental center of everything I do.
Great. Fantastic. Wow. A good friend of mine told me last week, I was chatting with him, he's already, retired, and he was telling me, Yael, it's good. Whatever you do in terms of sustainability, it's excellent. But the thing is that the most difficult part of the sustainability approach is change. And people don't like change, and they don't change. And I was like asking myself, after this conversation, is it realistic to say today that we don't change in a post-COVID era?
It's a great question, and I would say an unresolved one in my view, or I still have to learn more to be able to answer it with some cogency. At the same time, people say the only thing that doesn't change is change. Right. So change is happening. Change is happening in the form of technological disruption. Look back at the last 20, 30 years of technological evolution, the internet and everything. Change happens in geopolitical shifts. Change happens in terms of power relationships. Change happens in terms of, the home fronts, beliefs, our relationships with other genders and everything. All that stuff is happening, right? And so I think the question we have is, to what degree are we proactive or reactive in the context of change? And I think here the answer is, if anything, it's a mixed bag. Yes, I mean, we can see it if we look at the political spectrum on the range of issues where we see people being more reactive and more proactive, and not necessarily in a sort of one-dimensional way. You know, all the conservatives are on one end of the spectrum and all the others are somewhere else. It's a matter of nihilism versus agency, skepticism versus agency, and so on. So, yes, I think there are very strong forces that inhibit any form of change or transformation, and at the same time, there are a lot of forces pushing in the other direction, thinking about different ways to work and to act, building alternative models, building alternative technologies, changing policy and politics. I mean, we see this all the time, right? We see this all the time. It's just not always us.
Indeed, indeed. What is the status right now in the world? How would you define whatever is happening around us in terms of ESGs, decision making? I know, I mean, we've been in such a mess, you know, for the past couple of years. If I mean, you can tell, but I mean, can we speak about overconfidence? Are we underestimating the risks around us? What's the status overall?
Part of me wants to say chaos and confusion. But then not so long ago, I was watching a very interesting television show where a character who's a psychologist made a philosophical point that the world's always lived on the edge of chaos. So there's nothing new about it. But what we are seeing now with our current contemporary eyes is a rapid succession of crises.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
I agree. Yeah.
And the pandemic is one, the invasion of Ukraine is another, climate change and severe weather events and those manifestations are others. And what we're seeing is, you know, I think there's a subjective element, which is that we're psychologically overwhelmed because of just seeing new big things every day and every week in the media. And I think in part because of digitalization, we're just more aware and more subject to emotional reactions. You know, to very, very serious issues, and at the same time, going back to my TV character from earlier, you know, people have been dying for centuries, if not millennia. So there is something contemporary about this. There is also something contemporary about, I think, the view that we take, the systemic view, the systems view that we take of the implications of different things happening. You know, we see the war in Ukraine, the invasion, then, and we think, okay, there's a human rights crisis, but this is also compounding a globalized supply chain crisis in terms of commodities, for example, you know, agricultural one, and then that's going to impact already strained food systems, and then in terms of minerals and others. I mean, other people talk about this much better than I do, but so I don't want to claim to be an expert on you know, the lithium supply chain or any of that, or wheat for that matter. But I think what to me is really interesting is the compound effect.
Yeah.
And how we're looking at it, and how in some ways it feels inhibiting.
It is. Do you think that the decision we do today have heavily consequences on the inflation, for instance, or the prices rating that crazy? I mean, it's like, it sounds like we get the result of our inactions, some sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, acts have consequences, and inaction has consequences too. Inflation is the current trend of inflation obviously brings together a range of factors, you know, including government intervention, including supply chain woes, including COVID lockdowns, and so on and so forth. Um, I do think that it's a huge learning moment. You know, I don't want to look at this as, hey guys, I knew better, and if you'd followed my plan, if China had done this on lockdowns, and if America had done this on vaccination, and if you know, um,
I know
and
many, many, many people doing that already.
right, I mean, one thing we're seeing is we've all been getting a lot of stuff wrong. So I think we also have to take that moment and in inflation and all of it with humility, um, and and uh, and knowing what the factors are. You know, whether it's the Federal Reserve or government action and otherwise. But in all this, I mean, we see the levers. The levers have not disappeared, and I think that's something that's important, right? Although this compunction of inflation and the Ukraine invasion and so on is has the strong appearance and flavor of chaos. What we are seeing is that policy has an influence. Decisions have an impact, positive or negative. What we're seeing is that civil society has an impact. Civil society can organize and can have an impact through voting, where people are allowed to vote, or through also other forms of advocacy and so on. So within this chaos and within this, I think revisiting and reorganizing of tectonic power plates and shifts, which is what we talk about on our podcast, I don't want to lose track of the fact that all of us as individuals, as citizens, as participants in institutions have agency.
Yeah. Do you think those, and thank you for that, it highlights perfectly, you know, what I have in mind. Do you think we need those big cycles as human beings? We need to destruct and to reconstruct all the time? Is that only a sign of our times, or is it the only condition if we want to evolve some kind of?
It's a great question. I don't know. I'm tempted to say yes to a degree, but I also don't want to put this in nihilistic terms, right? Build something great and destroy it to the ground and start again. Yes, I mean, we've got Sisyphus, we've got Babel, we've got all these founding myths that are, you know, exist in a variety of forms across a range of cultures and reflect things about human nature. Yes, I mean, in the process of evolution, in the process of change, in the process of societal transformation, things get destroyed, new things get built, and in fact, you often need to build something new for the old to disappear. I mean, that's the basis of technological transformation, right?
Okay.
I'm just not sure what else to make of this.
It's funny because we spoke about change and now we speak about the paradox of life, some sort of, because you know, we have all those changes impacting us, from the pandemic, as you mentioned, the war between Ukraine and Russia, inflation, and so on. And I don't want to think about what's next, as Bill Gates mentioned in his latest TEDx. But are we built for that, or can we be ready? I mean, the notion of readiness here is important. Preparation. I mean, according to what's next, if there's something next.
Well, I mean, I think to a degree we can be, and that's part of evolving knowledge, evolving scientific and economic knowledge, right? I mean, central banks today have macroeconomic tools to address crises that they maybe didn't have before the great financial crisis, and so on. There's a learning process. Similarly in technology and you know, talking about environmental crisis, we do develop new technologies. There are people uh, doing that. It's just not everyone at the same time, at the same pace, right? That's where it's sort of chaotic and disorganized. Um, so my sense is that at any given time, but it's highly subjective and not a scientific answer, but any given time, uh, there are elements of society who are able to advance and confront and be proactive about change as opposed to reactive or passive for that matter. Um, I don't know. We both need to have more guests on our respective podcasts to figure this out.
Happy to have everyone, you know, because it's precisely what I'm hitting to right now. We're running several activities, common activities, of course, in between venue and the community, you know, and a startup also. And on my side, I figure out, you know, every day a bit more that I need very specific knowledge and more profile that are multi-talent, multi-focuses, with a 360 degree of whatever is happening around, not only data scientists or engineers, because we can think about a lot about how to code, how to imagine, you know, the next platforms, the next marketplaces per use. But I think we need maybe wider thinking, and that's related, you know, to what you say. We need more learning, and I think that those that are making the policies or deciding about the next regulations are maybe lacking of that knowledge, and maybe we need a bit more focus, you know, on the future, or, you know, by
Yeah.
living a good present. It's what are we expecting for?
You know, you raise a really interesting question that I've been thinking about and have not quite solved, and probably will not. But um, I think so. The evolution of the the job place, the professional place, is increasingly calling for multi-skilled people, multilingual people, people who can talk business and talk environment, talk finance and talk human rights and so on and so forth. Uh, I think on the other side of this, I mean, to say the obvious, it's impossible to know everything,
Of course not.
right? I mean, it's. I know that I know nothing. I know that I don't know much. All of that. We can also go back some centuries thinking on this, and so um, what's interesting is that there has to be a shift from thinking about uh, you know, talking about ESG roles, for example, in terms of a set of hard skills and knowledge and academic knowledge, to something that is much softer.
Yeah.
Which is how are we, when we in our work are now confronted to entirely new challenges every day, how do we equip ourselves to respond to them and to anticipate them and to be proactive about them when there is no way that we are all experts in climate change and human rights and gender issues and public equities and fixed income and hedge funds and the retail business and communications and technology and oil and gas and all of it. We cannot, no single human in the world can be that. I think, you know, in many ways, I'm thinking about the Western world here because it's something that I know better, obviously, but we live with a bit of a vision of the post-Enlightenment wise person. You know, people that knew everything, people that were at the top and the forefront of science and medicine and religion and education and philosophy. They just all beyond compound, and we moved into a very fragmented knowledge world. There's not much space today for journalists uh, in, uh, in this workplace. I think there's going to be a turnaround for that. We're not going to be all knowing, but this notion of being a journalist, this notion of soft skills, this notion of adaptability, this notion of uh, dealing with things that we don't master, finding other tools to do that, that's just increasingly fundamental.
Yeah.
And when you talk to education experts these days, they say, no, the emphasis is not on hard knowledge, it's resilience and curiosity and all of that. And I say, great, and I can't wait for employers to think in the same terms.
I mean, when you speak, I was thinking, I mean, I think about the fact that I was educated in a European country, in France. I grew up there, as you did,
As I did.
and yeah, I mean, it's like we had a very narrowed program about history, geography, whatever, physics. I think that, most of whatever we've learned over there might have been useful for a while. But today, when I have to face ESG reportings, dealing with decision makers, policy makers, speaking with leaders from all over the world, first of all, culturally speaking, we're not on the same page. But I think what's wrong here is about having different disconnected views. And we need to reconnect first, even before we do the first part, the first step, towards something that we need to photography at the right moment, and to say, okay, let's speak about ESG reporting, as you mentioned earlier. What's the next step? Although we are totally different.
Yeah, and that's interesting because this connects to what I said at the beginning in terms of my introduction, which is I'm trying to figure out what's the common ground. How do we as humankind get along, and find ways forward. And I also don't want to be too idealistic about this, right? I mean, there's no magic wand. There's no sudden consensus. So it's always fragmented. It's always partial knowledge. It is, and going back to this notion of skills and really mindset, it's how to be open to things being different, how to find ways to be grounded in values at the same time as owning doubt.
Yeah.
Philosophical, religious doubt, and all of it. It's going back to France. I mean, same in some ways. I was educated in a system that almost predates globalization, where the boundaries of society seem established.
Oh yeah.
This is the country, and around the country is the EU, and around the EU is some continents, and then generally a capitalist bloc, and generally a post-communist bloc, but it's okay, they will become capitalist, that sort of thing. And here's your rank in society, by the way, because that's the education you got, and therefore here's what you're entitled to. And that didn't work out.
Actually not. I can tell. I can tell. Wow, thank you so much for this first shot. It was great.
My pleasure.
I think that we're gonna have to make another episode. Thank you for your insights. It's clear that we have to work on specific things.
Thank you, and always happy to talk, and I always leave wondering whether I've said anything that isn't just asking more questions.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that speaks to one big thing, which is it's have direction, but also leave certainties behind, because it's going to be a rocky road.
Definitely, I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jérôme.